All right, Chelsea fans, you know what? We are back because it can't go a day, a minute, an hour sometimes without Chelsea signing another player. And we are back at it to discuss Pedro Neto from Wolves joining Chelsea, announced basically out of nowhere, almost a little bit like a Chelsea transfer of yore, where you wake up, you're doing something, you're going about your day, and boom, Chelsea gets a business done in the window. This had the shades of old as it relates to how those type of transfers come through versus what we've seen in recent history, where it basically becomes a prolonged 5 to 6 week will they won't they experience, almost like a romantic comedy. And the comedy is usually on how much we overpaid for a player. But Nick, I want to get into the Pedro Neto deal. I want to talk about just your feelings and initial reaction to it. I think I want to get into his past performance, talk a little bit about the injury history, and then also kind of talk about the impact this is going to have to the other wingers we have in the squad, because there's always a knock-on effect when these things happen. And just to kind of say, we'll set the stage for Brees Hawkins, but I've got the David Ornstein quote pulled up here. Chelsea reached the agreement with Wolverhampton Wanderers, signed Pedro Neto, fee of 60 million euros plus 3 million in add-ons. 24-year-old Portuguese international winger set to undergo medical soon, which apparently is going to happen Saturday when you're watching this video, Saturday the 10th of August. So the announcement should be sometime next week. Initial thought, reaction, feeling to the signing.
Yeah, I mean, in WWE parlance, it is an RKO out of nowhere. Like we never we've been like loosely linked with Neto the past couple of years. This has been a player who always seems to turn up and play very well against us, and so that's been not so fun. But you've heard little rumors for the last couple of years. What is this someone who might be a target? He's the right age profile. He, is 24. It's basically a 34-year-old in this squad, but it's a player who has bright sparks. You see the skill on the ball, you see the dribbles, you see the counterattacking runs, you see the closed control when he's being kind of doubled up by the opposition. He's a player with a robust talent. He's a Portuguese international, and that team is not easy to get into. I mean, they were about as loaded as any team at the Euros this summer, and just couldn't quite get it done. So this is an interesting one, right? Because on its face, you're like, wow, that's a really interesting signing for Chelsea. We've heard for the last few weeks, Dan, that Chelsea are still looking for a left-footed winger to add to the squad. Matt Law thought it was going to be a left winger. Others have thought it was going to be a right winger. Turns out it's kind of both because he has played in both positions and some others for Wolves over the last couple of years. So there's a lot to dive into here, but it's certainly we had to change our editorial schedule because of today's news. So thank you to everyone involved there.
Well, look, he will be the eighth oldest player at Chelsea when he joins
Oh
the
my
squad out of
God.
the 500
What the
players that
hell?
we currently have registered to sort through. So it really, really interesting here. Things I like just off the top, right? You highlighted this. I like the fact that it's an older profile of player. It's not someone, even recently, right, with Samu from Atleti coming in, another 21-year-old attacker. We signed Cole Palmer with basically no Premier League minutes last season. Nico Jackson coming in with basically no Premier League minutes. Nice to see a player from the Premier League, little older age profile, should be going into the best possible years of his career as a professional footballer. So like those are things that are very, very exciting. And this also is kind of the knock on from not getting Elise done over the past 2 seasons, right? You had an opportunity to do it a season ago, and there was the tampering concerns that basically had the deal fall apart. And then you had the opportunity to do it this summer, but a lot of people were in the race. The wage demands kind of creeped up to be a little too high for what Chelsea felt like they should go after, and walked away from the opportunity. So, I mean, I think, from our perspective, there's some like initial thoughts there. He also fits the weight, like he's going to absolutely fit the wage structure way better. He's at like 50,000 pounds a week, according to Capology. I imagine he's going to get a sizable bump to that and still be one of our like mid-tier level players in terms of the amount of money he's making on a week-to-week basis. But I know there were you and I both looked up some thoughts from Wolves fans, and in general, it seemed to be they are disappointed to see him leaving, but they're not unhappy considering the amount of money they got for him.
Yeah, and you look at Wolves over the last couple of years, they sold Mateus Nunez to City last summer, right? Like they're not like a Brighton or like a Bournemouth or any of these clubs that kind of like stock and replenish. They usually sell one or two big players a year, and then they recoup those funds and do what I suppose we're trying to do right now, which is get players before they reach that level. You did mention, Dan, one of the things you liked about him is his experience. He has been in England for what, 5 years now, something like since, yeah, 2019, 2020.
Yep.
So that's not nothing either. I do think Premier League experience, given everything that's gone on this summer, right? You're signing players from the Swiss league or from the Brazilian league or from the Ecuadorian league or from anywhere around the world. Getting a player with Premier League experience, as we saw with Cole Palmer last year, even at a young profile, can mean the difference in just onboarding time, right?
Yep.
He knows the league. He's played in the league for 5 years. He's played in the league since he was 19. So the physical journey, injuries aside, which we'll talk about here in a second, to get up to speed in the Premier League is going to be less because he has already done it for a significant period of time. This is a player who has been one of Wolves' most important players for most of that run. So, yeah, it was definitely out of nowhere, and it's a player who, as we dive into his stats, Dan, has the potential, if he reaches it, to really impact the way that Chelsea play and the sorts of results that we are able to get.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at last season in terms of all competitions, he played just over 1,700 minutes, ended up making 19 starts, 24 matches played, 13 goals plus assists over that period, with a 0.68 goals plus assists per 90. So, I mean, in general, that's the type of contribution you would want to see for the minute volume that you're kind of providing in that moment. I think the thing to kind of consider in that regard, if you kind of think about where Chelsea were at last season, I mean, taking Cole Palmer's 33 just in the Premier League goals plus assist, I mean, that effectively would be kind of in the range of what Gallagher and Raheem Sterling contributed, well ahead of like Madueke and Mudryk, who were both like on 7 apiece. So like definitely has a little bit more in terms of what he's been able to kind of contribute over similar minute pools with similar types of players. So like that is a positive in terms of like stepping up the floor of where Chelsea's attack is season over season. But I think the thing that you kind of highlighted, rightfully so, is the injury concern is going to be the biggest thing to figure out. And boy, oh boy, you hope you can keep him healthy, and you hope that you can that the new physio staff at Chelsea are going to be ready to make sure that he has the best possible season and is playing the most possible minutes of his career in a season, because he's not had a season where he's played outside of 2020 where he played 2,700 minutes, made 31 starts. He has not played over 2,000 minutes since that season.
Yeah, and that's a big concern, right? I mean, we've talked so long about injuries and injury record and medical staffs and all this sort of stuff. And like, this is now a player just like Nkunku who's been brought in after not completing a full season. And we, saw his unfortunate trajectory last year. I mean, he's had multiple hamstring injuries that have cost him 12 and 11 games over the last couple of years. He had a really bad ankle injury in 2022, 2023 that cost him 27 games. He had a bad knee injury that took him out for basically the entire season. It cost him 52 games. And then just little, kind of smaller injuries that keep him out for 1, 2, 3, 4 games that aren't that big of a deal going back to 2017, 18. But the hamstring, the ankle, the knee, these are all like the main culprits. These are the characters that you don't want to see in a physio room, I should say. And it does make you worry, especially with something like the hamstring, because we've seen that so acutely with Reece James and others over the last few years, that once that hamstring goes, it is really, really hard to come back to your best within the scope of that season without taking a significant amount of time off. And I had some folks telling me I was being a negative Nancy today about this, that I
You?
couldn't possibly be excited about this trend. No, I mean, this is a serious thing, man. Like, it is. And I it's not to say that this isn't a incredibly bright, dynamic player, Dan. It's to say that, in this season in particular, where we could play up to 70 games, only having him available for 27 games ain't going to cut it.
Yeah, I do rate the injury concern as a primary element to kind of think about. I mean, 23 matches missed last season, 27 matches missed the season prior. I mean, so he's, missed more than he's played, which is never a good trend line. Now, I mean, I think that when some of them are ankle or knee versus like the muscle, or like knee is kind of a weird one, right? When you like break something and then like that just happens, and like it's not usually like a repeatable type of injury. The ones that you're talking about in terms of hamstring with the kind of larger 2 month, 3 month kind of time frame where they're out, that is the more concerning element. And so that's going to go down to load management. It's going to go down to making sure that and that's like a whole team issue. So I think it's going to be, have we built out the right culture and kind of thought process under Maresca with the new performance coaches to figure out like, how do we keep this team, including Pedro Neto, healthy throughout the season to minimize any repeat injury as much as possible.
Especially with someone like him, whose explosiveness is part of what makes him exciting, right? Like, this is, his skill on the ball is what makes him exciting. His speed makes him exciting. That's what has kind of made his career to the point where he's now a 50+ million pound transfer to Chelsea instead of staying at Wolves. And so, yeah, whatever is being done in the physio room at Chelsea, he needs to get on that program. He needs to find some fitness. I wouldn't expect to see him straight away against City next week, for example, because I think he's going to need time to get acclimatized to everything that's going on. But it is interesting too. I just wanted to point out, I was curious because we've seen him play all over the field. He has played time at Wolves at right wing, at attacking midfield as an 8. He's played as second striker. He's played as a center forward, which is funny just given his stature, which is not very large. He's like 5'5", something like that. But the majority of his time is at left wing. And one of the questions that I had, Dan, is, for a player who's this good, and we've heard rumors about, what this means for our wingers in general if we add a winger. This is a guy who has tactical flexibility, unlike Michael Olise, who would primarily have stayed on that right side. If we're kind of comparing the two, this guy could play on the left, where maybe a Raheem Sterling or Mykhailo Mudryk isn't quite doing enough. Maybe he is the incumbent there. He can play on the right and put Palmer in the middle. Like, there's some interesting options with him.
Yeah, he's 5'8". Just to he's not.
Sorry,
like,
not 5'5".
He's not that short. Just to be fair and make sure that we give him all the credit for the height that he does have. And thinking about that knock-on effect is, I think, kind of the last thing I want to kind of dig into. Like, this is just, again, the top of the tier is Cole Palmer, and then it's everybody else is beneath him in terms of the like who is starting on the team sheet if healthy every given week. Cole Palmer is number one from the winger perspective. And then right now you have Madueke, Sterling, Mudryk, and you're adding Pedro Neto to the mix. Like, I don't think it is inconceivable with the addition of Samu, with Nkunku being available and no defined location for him yet, Nico Jackson and him potentially being like a left wing option as well, which we've seen previously. I think there is a lot of interesting Frankenstein attacks we're going to see over the next 3 to 4 weeks as Chelsea land their preseason that is actually part of the regular season to figure out what's happening here. But I would not be surprised if this is the setting of the stage for someone like Madueke to leave. He is someone who Chelsea did not sign for a ton of money, could turn a profit on, and does seem to have some level of Premier League interest for him. I think Mudryk is one of the hardest players to sell given the transfer value that we have. And even if he is not your favorite player, even if you're maybe down on him and you feel like the stock is down for him, like, I think he's going to be extremely hard to move on. And then Raheem Sterling is also a really other hard player to move on too, because he's the highest paid player on the team at the moment, and moving off of that wage is going to be really difficult. Not to say that you can't do it, because we've seen players in this Chelsea side make a determination that they would rather be a first choice player and play and move someplace else. I think that might be a hard sell. And so, like, in my mind, this signing is like the worst for someone like Madueke, who actually probably has some Premier League interest, could be sold and generate some type of profit value on the books for Chelsea, and seemingly actually could then be a net negative as terms of a signing, because now we're then saying, okay, well, we're going to persevere with Sterling, we're going to persevere with Mudryk, and hope that we get what we need from a contribution standpoint this season.
I'll disagree with you, Dan. I actually think it's the worst for Mudryk, a player who did not get a whole lot done in preseason. I think has been kind of second choice the entire time he's been at Chelsea, and someone who I think it doesn't take eyeballs to see that he's just not at the level yet. If you like me are assuming that right wing is locked up, then that puts Neto in one position only, and that's going to be on the left. And so if I were looking at Mudryk potentially being a third stringer, I think there is a better chance for him to go on some sort of loan, build up his profile again, get as much playing time as he possibly can have, and then see if there is a market for, someone to come in and do a deal than, someone like Sterling. Although I must say, there's already rumors of Juve and Sterling and what that might mean. Now, it would seem impossible on his wages to make that work. I agree with you, and I'm not, I don't live in the clouds on that sort of stuff. But, I think the left side is far more likely to be impacted than the right side. I think you have seen enough from Madueke to keep him as a tantalizing option, and I don't think you've seen the same from Mudryk.
I like that you have more faith in how the sporting directors will act in this moment than I do, because I'm trying to read through the tea leaves here and think about how they're going to act and think about what they're going to do. I mean, arguably, this is a very good signing, at least on the front of it, with some major concerns that we would have about the injury history and the availability and just the volume of contributions. Can he take the next step up? I mean, Wolves have never been the most exciting team on a Premier League pitch. They've never been the most dynamic attacking squads on a Premier League pitch. And so like that is going to have a negative impact on any attacker within their system. And so like you're hoping that there's a bump up playing in the system. There's a bump up playing with guys like Christopher Nkunku and Cole Palmer. Like in general, you should be a better attacker with playing with those two guys than playing with the players that you had at Wolves. So, I mean, I think in general, like, let us know in the comments. Let us know, like, do you like the signing? Are you excited? Are you still concerned about where Chelsea are going? Do you feel like Chelsea still need a couple other players to reinforce? Or are you ready for Chelsea to start hitting the Jim Cramer sell button as quickly as possible to get some players out, thin the squad, and make life a little bit easier for Enzo Maresca? That's going to do it for this video. Like and subscribe. We'll be back with more content as always. But until next time, Chelsea fans, you know what to do. Keep the blue flag flying high.